Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the class, both to new and long-time students and lovers of history. This is History with Sire here today to go you further on our topic of the US civil rights. If you haven't already, do check out the previous video where I went over the key contextual background for the World War conflict that we now find ourselves in between 1941 and 1945. Do remember as well, this is content catered towards a student level, so we have some key knowledge and key historical skills practiced along the way. With all that said, notepads and pens at the ready, and let us begin. So as I said, we looked at the key contextual background of the Second World War in the previous video, and now we're going to move on to how it actually impacted African Americans. Because again, our focus is on civil rights. We're not here for the military battles. We want to really understand how it impacted the African American community at large. Let's see how it did. So, what was the experience for the African American communities actually like? Well, it was quite an interesting one, to say the least. Again, we have had the African Americans serve in wars before, especially the American Civil War, and of course, more recently in the First World War. And something that carries over from that conflict is the idea of segregation. Many of the black soldiers who did enlist knew they would be serving in segregated units. The Marines and the Army Air Corps, predecessor to the Air Force or USAF, refused to accept blacks until later in the war. The Navy actually only accepted them as kitchen workers. Most men in the Army were used to working in more non-combative roles. However, some, quite importantly, did serve on the front lines. For instance, very famously, the Tuskegee Airmen were one P-51 Mustang planes during the war. They actually flew them on D-Day, a very famous day in 1944, when the Americans invaded to German-occupied France. They also provided fighter escorts for many bombers across Germany during the war. They actually never lost a single plane that they protected. Another notable unit was the 761st Tank Battalion, who were the Black Panthers of the Second World War. They served at Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge in 1944 and provided key defense for the 101st Airborne Defensive that was occurring there in the battle. It's really interesting to note as well for the Tuskegee Airmen, they made up soldiers from the southern states of America, which again was the most racist by all accounts in the nation. So quite interesting that actually they're really proving how capable they are in the conflict. They can fight just as well, if not better, than the white Americans who they are with. What was relationships like between the blacks and the whites during the conflict? Well, sadly to admit, some white units were very openly hostile towards the black soldiers. This hostility when they crossed paths would sometimes break into violence, and white soldiers would attack, beat, and sadly even kill some of the blacks that they were serving alongside with. However, on the other side, some blacks and whites would also form friendships when serving together as well, especially men who fought together on the front lines. However, they couldn't really repeat this when they returned home, and it's a real problem we find for them when they leave the front and return to the home front. For other soldiers, the war enabled them, through their military service, to gain certain employment opportunities and qualifications. Many of them actually would then want to return to the cities of the North in the ghettos when they returned home after the war. Many actually encountered these unimagined experiences for the first time. There was one African American called Roscoe Pickett who recalled that by serving in the armed forces, he learned a very, very important fact, and I quote, he knew that he wasn't going to go back to the farms of the South. He wanted to go to college and become someone and go somewhere. He knew that even though he was an African American, he could do things more than just be on the plantations, be on the farms, and he could do something with his life, and he felt changed for the better. For James Jones, who served in the Black Panthers Tank Battalion and saw action in Europe, he believed that the French found impact on his life. He felt they were very open, they were very warm, and that their openness to him as a minority was something he could not compare to life back in America. He believed that the French saw him as an African American. They saw him simply as himself, and that's something that he really, really treasured. Back home in America, though, the whites wanted to put the blacks back in their place. One man called Henry Murphy said that when he returned to the States and called his father in Mississippi, a southern state, his father warned him not to wear his uniform. There were reports that white policemen were beating black soldiers and searching them, and apparently if they found a picture of a white woman in their wallet, they would use that as an excuse to kill them and say that they'd done some terrible things, sexually abused these white women. Because of that, Murphy actually hid his identity as a veteran from the war, and he came home dressed in overalls and a jumper. It was a tragic case with a man called Dabney Hammer, who came back wearing his medals, wearing his uniform, and a white man in his hometown of Mississippi racially abused him and proved that war had not changed the attitudes of Southern whites about their Jim Crow segregation. There was even women who were impacted as well. One lady, Luella Newsom, said that this segregationist ways had to change because African Americans as a whole were not going to stand for this anymore. Many of the veterans, having fought in the war, came back quite militant. They knew that Jim Crow was not inevitable and was not the only way of life, and the South did not have to be as racist and segregated as it was. There was even a push by African Americans to try and achieve the vote in much more greater numbers. There was a massive voter drive up north, especially among the black veterans by 1946, to get more blacks to vote and to allow them to have a bigger impact on American politics. I also want to give a special mention to the Double V campaign that was occurring for the African American community at home. Now this principally concerned where African Americans were volunteering or were indeed were drafted after the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. They were put in these segregated divisions, and as we said, they were forced to cook, they became quartermasters, or even grave digging duty. The military, even for the Northern soldiers, felt just as segregated as the Deep South was. 2 months after the Americans joined the war in February 1942, the Pittsburgh Courier, the most widely read black newspaper in America, began a campaign urging black people to give their all for the war effort. However, while doing so, was also calling on Roosevelt's government to honor the African American citizenship and to honor all Americans regardless of their race. This evolved into the Double V campaign, which meant they wanted victory abroad against the Nazis and the Axis powers at home, but they also wanted victory at home against the racial segregation. You may remember Philip Randolph from the Brother of Sleeping Car Porters way back in the 20s and 30s, and he actually organized a march on Washington during the war, protesting the discrimination that was occurring within the defense industry. But it wasn't Roosevelt who stood up for them and sided with Philip Randolph. It actually was Eleanor Roosevelt, his wife, who did so instead. Eleanor had been a very active campaigner during the 1930s. She actually famously went to Hoovervilles, places where the destitute and the homeless and those without any place to go in America were staying during the Great Depression, and she met them and stayed with them, got to know them. She really became a first lady of the people. She actually met Randolph as well here during the war and tried to convince him to call the march off, promising that some action would be taken. However, Randolph refused. He wanted Roosevelt, the president, to come and make a change instead. Therefore, the march still indeed happened and the protest continued. And it was Roosevelt himself who finally gave in, and he finally passed an executive order banning discrimination across the entire American defense industry. This became known on June 25th, 1942, as an Executive Order 8802, which was the Fair Employment Practices Committee, and this enforced a new rule that there shall be no discrimination in the employment of workers in defense industries or government because of race, creed, color, or national origin. I think it's worth noting this is a massive political success that occurs during the Second World War and really shows that with the actions of campaigning, African American community coming together, they could have a big impact. But it's also the first real incident we have here of the impact of the media. Again, a lot of this started because of the Pittsburgh Courier, the famous newspaper who started this Double V campaign. And so I really want to point that out to us that the media can have a massive impact on evolving civil rights movements as well. This campaign had ran weekly and would continue to do so into 1943 as well. It was promoting patriotism, with the Courier including the American flag with every subscription they sold, and also convincing people to buy war bonds. What is a war bond? It's an investment during the conflict, people to buy into it and fund the war effort. There also was a campaign that spread towards celebrity figures as well. Very famously, women were also changing their hairstyles into these victory rolls or the double V hairstyle. You can see with the image on the left, one celebrity lady actually wearing the double V's in her hair to really promote the image and promote the cause as well. After the war was officially completed by September 1945, the Double V campaign did end, but it only ended its Double V part. Instead, it switched to a single V for publications occurring from 1946 onward. This was a clear indication that they wanted work now to focus exclusively on the racism that was occurring in America at home. While true, we probably can't say the Double V campaign through the Pittsburgh Courier newspaper definitely achieved the concrete developments for a change with the executive order from Roosevelt, and there truly at this point wasn't much change after that. What is true is that through this outlet, we now had a clear voice for the African American and America at whole who wanted to protest racial discrimination and contribute towards the war effort. And there we go. That's some key contextual background for us that happened on the home front for the African American community during the war, but also during the conflict as well, for those African Americans who did serve and who did fight. In the following video, we'll explore the immediate impact in the post-war age for the African American and see if there's any long-lasting change that's been spurred on by the Second World War. As always, do make sure you subscribe to keep track of this series and, of course, learn more civil rights along the way. Thank you as always for watching. This has been History with Sire. Thank you for listening.